Crisis Shortcuts is brought to you by Mindstream, music designed to help you, your loved ones, and even your pets feel calmer. Check out Mindstream, that's Mind with a Y, on all the usual streaming platforms. Welcome to Crisis Shortcuts with me, Andy Coulson. Occasional bonus episodes to sit neatly alongside the main podcast, Crisis What Crisis. Much like those longer conversations, in Shortcuts you'll hear from brilliant people who, in their own words, tell us about their crises, how they got through them, and what they've learned. Although these episodes are brief, believe me, the insights are just as big. So if you're short on time, but looking for inspiration or guidance, Shortcuts will offer a quick fix of useful lessons from those who've been there and lived to tell the tale. And don't forget, you can still join me for our longer conversations on Crisis What Crisis, where we talk in greater depth and share those powerful coping strategies that will hopefully help you guide through the pitfalls of life. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle is at Crisis What Crisis Podcast. And if you like what you hear, please do head over to Apple and leave us a rating and a review. It really helps make sure these stories get to the widest possible audience. Hope you enjoy this Crisis Shortcut.
I'm Anthony Drux, and I'm a former NFL athlete, American Ninja Warrior on NBC. I'm also a speaker, author, coach, and the founder of the Shift Method, where we help people make shift happen in their lives and businesses. So I was born in 1983 in a town called Martinez in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was born to a single white mom. And my father, who was, I didn't find out till years later, was an African-American man. He kind of disappeared. He was never around, I think, at any point in time when I was first born. And so growing up, I grew up in a weird environment where my mom, she had 3 more kids after me with another man within a year. And so there was me and 3 siblings, and we were all within 4 years of each other. And essentially, my childhood was one that was riddled with a whole lot of poverty and a lot of sadness. My mom, in fact, gave all of us away when I was 3 years old. So my early stages of life was not knowing my father, and the only person that I really wanted to love him, which was my mom, essentially decided to give me and the rest of my siblings away to a really heinous foster care system. So from the age of essentially 3 when I was given away, I bounced around from house to house from 3 to 6. And in those houses, there were people that weren't the best people in the world, we'll call it. And some would, kind of do some weird, torturous things to kids. And it still, unfortunately, I think goes on to an extent to this day. But back then, there was no cell phones, there was no social media, there was nobody knowing what's going on. And so what they would do is essentially I was what's called a paycheck. As long as I didn't die in the house, they got a paycheck for me. So they wouldn't feed me, wouldn't clothe me. One house forced me to chase chickens to earn meals. One house put me in shopping carts and pushed me down hills towards moving traffic. Another home forced me to sit in the curb outside the house and lick the bottom of the neighbor kid's shoes until my tongue had bled one time. And so just really heinous stuff. And at 6 years old, I landed in the house, which is still my home to this day. But there's a weird dynamic, being that I was the only Black person in this all-white family, still had, very poverty-ridden, like we didn't have much of anything growing up. So my years from the age of pretty much 3 until 14, 11 years in the foster care system, during the pivotal, I guess, molding times of my humanity, they were just very, very sad and torturous and difficult years. But man, they would lend to be a strength later on in my life. From the age of 14, so finally I got adopted at 14, which is interesting because in order to be adopted, I had to actually go into a courtroom and stand in front of my biological mom and tell her I no longer want you to be my mom anymore. And it severed what's called parental rights. And parental rights allowed her to make decisions on my life, which she could no longer do. And so I was able to be adopted. And it was the first time that I knew for the first, moment ever that this house I woke up in, I for sure get to go to bed here tonight. And it was a different sense of like a little bit of stability, a little bit of freedom. And it also led to me having an opportunity to go do something that was, I guess, taken advantage of by a lot of people, but for me was amazing, was I got to go hit people and not get in trouble. And in America, we call this American football. And so as a kid, I got to go out there and for the first time, try my hand at something that I yearned like for a long time to get to go do. But like many people, when you try something new that you from the outside looking in see as some amazing thing, you try it and you're met with the reality that you suck at it. And I stepped away from it. At the same time, my adoptive mom had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. My older brother in the house of 6, who was like my rock, went off to the military. And so I was kind of in that floating stage of life, lending my hand towards becoming a statistic, which essentially, if most people don't know this, in America, if you go to any prison in our American, country, that 75% of the inmates are former foster kids. Half our homeless population has spent time in foster care, and less than 1% of us ever graduate from college. So statistically, I was headed down a pretty dark path. This quote that I love, and it goes, "A smooth sea makes not a skilled sailor." And so for me, I had not had a smooth sea, but I had become a skilled sailor. I was more communicative. I was a little more charismatic because a lot of it's a survival skill. I could see people differently than they could probably see themselves. I understood what was going on more than most of my peers. I just had a different sense of self and a different sense of the world around me. So even though we had this household where, we had a loving mom and dad, we weren't we didn't have the most stability. We didn't have the most structure. I don't think there's any point in time I can go back where I remember my mom or dad ever checking my grades. Like, my mom was sick, and so my dad was, working his butt off to make sure he could take care of the family. So he's gone all day. Mom is sick, and she's not really, she's bedridden, so she can't really get out and go see what's going on. I got no brother at home, and I'm just, whenever football's not in, I'm just kind of running around, hanging out with friends. And so, I got a little job so I could buy a car, and I'm driving around and hanging with my friends. Next thing you know, whenever you have the ability to be around people that just, they fill the gap and make you feel like things are exciting, you end up kind of sliding into the excitement. And next thing I know, I find myself breaking into cars in the middle of nights and stealing stuff and all that, all the bad stuff. Things where in hindsight, I feel so horrible for the person that had to wake up the next morning and go see their car had been vandalized. It's a feeling that to this day, like, it still carries with me. But yeah, I ended up one evening, the police pull up in front of my house, and sure enough, I'm, held at gunpoint and pulled out of the car, and the car is searched and all that fun stuff. I remember sitting in the backseat of the police car, and there's colleges had been sending me letters, and the police officer grabs one out of my car, and he walks up to the grate and slams it against the grate in front of my face and the passenger side in the back, and he says, "You can kiss your future goodbye." And it was that moment that I was like, oh man, like, this is not the place I'm supposed to be. And that was a very pivotal moment for me to get my head back on straight and stay the course in a positive direction. So around the same overlapping time period, I'd met this girl who would end up being my high school sweetheart. In fact, we were the cutest couple in the yearbook that year. And so she found that my college had the number 2 school in the nation for what she wanted to do in family and human services. So she decided to come up. Her family said, "Great, go up there. Just don't get pregnant. Focus on school," all that fun stuff. So I want to say it might have been like 6 to 8 months before we were pregnant. and next thing I know, we have a kid coming. And it's funny, is my freshman year, before she even moved up, I knew she was the one. Like, I knew I wanted to marry this woman, and I'd proposed to her with a little itty bitty diamond ring that, like, I don't even know if you could tell there was a diamond in it. It was so tiny, but she said yes. And so we were engaged, and, we were going to get married, and, we were kids. I think it was kind of like, yeah, we're going to get married, but you don't know for sure. But then we had a kid, and it was this weird thing where the kid it wasn't this like, oh, we're stuck. It was like, man, I get to now give back to a kid in a way that wasn't given to me. I get to create this life for another being, and I get to have this life that I never had. I get to have this parental, son, wife situation that I did not grow up with. And 2 years later, after he was born, we ended up, it was my senior year of college. We were heading off to the NFL. We ended up getting married in Maui, Hawaii. And it was beautiful, man. I had this anchoring to a place that I'd never felt before. It would have been nice to have experienced it from the position of the kid, being the child, looking up to mom and dad who had that anchored relationship. But if I couldn't be in that role and experience it, I figured the next best role would be the one from the parental side. And so now it's interesting. As close as I am to my children, I am incredibly distant from their life experience. I don't know what it's like to be them, but I do know what it's like to have a bonded parental relationship. So I love that I get to provide something for my kids I didn't have and get to experience it from at least this side. So what's interesting is where most guys and girls are going off to college, and they're essentially creating, their foundation. They're just having fun and partying and hanging out. Like, I was a father. My wife and I, we were kids having a kid. And so we navigated the college experience as not only were we students, and she was like a 4.2 GPA. She was incredibly smart and did great in school. I was a full-time student as well, and an athlete, full-time athlete. And we had a kid. There are adults who can't do these things, and we somehow managed this whole thing. But the crazy thing was, like, it was fun. It wasn't, I think that there's this draw that people had, like, oh, baby in college. I'm like, yeah, but it was my baby. Like, it was my little guy. If I'm up till 6 a.m. and I got to get up for school at 7, like, with my guy. It's me bouncing around. There was a different anchored heart there. I just had a different connection. So after college, not all people have the opportunity, but I was blessed to be one of the I think like 0.00001% of college football players get a chance to play professionally. So I was blessed to play in the NFL. And the NFL is a funny acronym or name, and it just says the NFL stands for not for long. Is kind of like the joke, because you get in, and unfortunately, whether it's contracts or every year thousands of guys come in or injuries, which was my case, the game ends quick. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get past 3 years, and I got hurt in my third year. And so the NFL was this time frame, which is odd because for as short as it was, it carries so much weight for people and how they see me in America. Unfortunately, when the game ends, we don't know what to do with ourselves because nobody plans for the game to end. And so for me, when the game ended, I had to navigate, like, what do I do with my life now? Who is Anthony without this thing? And I don't care who you are. If you have lived a life where you've given of yourself energy and emotion and just time and effort and heart into something for a long period of time, whether you wake up one day by choice or chance, no matter what it is, if you wake up one day and you're no longer doing that thing, it's a big blow. I neglected my family, I neglected my health, my wife, everything. So I find myself at one point in time with a failing business, a failed marriage, failing as a parent. My body was out of shape and I didn't know what to do. And anything that had made Anthony was no longer present. Just didn't feel like me. And it was a point where I was like, well, if this is life after the game, then I don't want to live life, because it was not enjoyable. And, thankfully I didn't take any true actions to leave this world. But like I at one point highly, highly considered it. So I think at a given point in time, sometimes moments that are not the best happen and they give you a wake up call. And so for me, it was April 15th, 2014. And my adoptive mom, who had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 17 years earlier, she came to the back end of her years. And it was unfortunate, like she passed away. And I was in the room holding her hand as she took her final breaths. And in those moments, it's very like mortal. You have to actually like question and think about life. And I realized at this moment in time, I was not living a good life. The woman who had given me all the capabilities of doing something great that I'd done great things with, I was now squandering in the future for whatever reason. It wasn't a future that could have been. And so in her passing, I made two promises. Promise one was I'm going to figure out how to get this thing back on track. Because if the trajectory I'm going right now is not any in a destination that anybody wants to be. So that was the first promise. Like, Mom, I'm going to make sure that your energy and love into me isn't worthless, because she had unconditionally loved me in a way that did not make sense. I was not her blood. I was difficult. I was problematic. I was a bad little kid. I just was. And she loved me past all my crazy. And the second promise was, when I get back on track, I'm going to do what you did for me for the world somehow. I'm going to find a way to unconditionally love in the world that was not my blood to make something better happen. 2 years later, in some roundabout way, 2.5 years actually, my ex-wife and I, after being divorced for 3 years, got remarried. We found each other at different stages of progression internally. We both had grown, and we rekindled something that probably could have always been there, but we didn't have the right foundation to build a long-term marriage when we first got together. We were 16. We didn't have the right things, but now we had them. And then when I was able to navigate that, like I got back in shape, I became a present father. I have a great marriage. Now my life is vastly different, but some of the things that I've learned and navigated, they're very beneficial to different people at different stages. And so that was kind of the transition of me seeking a way to make sure my mom's name is carried on past me. When you fully understand your enemy, you learn to love your enemy. Because I think at a certain point, you see the humanity in them. Now, obviously, each person's not an actual enemy, but there's opposition to the situations. So what I came to find was like, there are a lot of people that just weren't given the tools. They're doing the best they can, and they're not doing things that purposely hurt me. In fact, it must be dark to have to carry the weight of your family falling apart, or not being a present father, or giving your kid away to watch him grow up and do great things in the world. There's got to be a weight to that. And so at a certain level, as a human, I go, man, as opposed to being angry, like maybe there's a compassion that should enter in. And so in that compassion, I find that like I am relieved of the anger. I'm able to actually forgive. Not to say that they get off the hook. Like they still have to live with that, but I don't have to live with the feeling of that. And so in that space, I've found that forgiveness is not always this thing where it has to be an emotional, retribution. But in fact, like most of the time, it's giving out what you wish someone would give you. I'm 97% of the time I'm in a very good mood. But those 3% days, man, they exist. They have to exist. They have to give balance. I have to recoup. But to be honest, man, whenever I have those really tough, heavy days, I'm not just saying it because it sounds all, cliche, but I actually sit back and go, man, I appreciate where I'm at in comparison to where I could be. It's a genuine sit back and like appreciate the house I woke up in, the snacks I get to eat if I'm hungry, the food I get to have, the trips I've taken, the family I have. Like I get to appreciate it all. Anything that I am letting take me down is exactly that. I am letting it do it. But if I can anchor to the reason I'm here and what I want to do, and I have purpose in my direction of my day, I just have to get back to motion. And I find there's magic in the motion and I create that joy again. And what I found is all these experiences have become bricks that I've built this cathedral of life into. Like it's one of these things where they're all there. They don't disappear. I do remember them. I do feel them. But the reality is they were bases of the foundation of what I could build on top of. The bricks are just bricks, And at the end of the day, if you build, you find that even if something goes wrong, you can also rebuild. And so for me, my life has been just a collection of weird, bad days of bad bricks, but also amazing ones. And I believe the height that I've been able to build this life up to now is only because I've made very, very aware, like my heart, of those crazy bricks that are down below and built on them. So my first crisis cure is I call it reframing failure. And so this means in the middle of crisis, usually we feel like we've failed or something has failed. And usually we make it way worse than it actually is. It's the relationship that fails and I feel unlovable and no one's ever going to love me again. And it's like, no, maybe that version of you wasn't the best. There's different levels. Maybe that situation is you didn't show up as the best you, but if you can reframe the failure to find the lesson, you find a way to do better next time and you find hope to actually pursue something greater. So the crisis doesn't become this thing that immediately lifts and you feel great, but it does give you hope to not have to face the same crisis in the future. My second crisis cure is organization. And while it feels odd, like someone would say organization in crisis, I find that a lot of the time, the reason we stay in crisis is because we don't know how to move out of it. We don't know which path to go. I don't want to take the wrong path, so I take no path. And it becomes a very self-perpetuating cycle of just suck. And so what I do is I sit down and say, okay, I need to organize and see what's going on. I need to actually have everything that's up in the air come down to earth so I can see what it is. And once I can see, now I can chart a path. The third crisis cure for me is action. Action ends suffering. The truth is a lot of us have these emotional feelings that we just sit with for far too long because we take no action to change them. Feelings are born of actions. And if you've taken an action that led you to a place of feeling this way, the only cure is to actually go and take an action in opposition to give yourself a different reason to believe or find joy or find hope. And so for a lot of people, that moment when you do not want to move or do anything is the moment you must move and do something.